Hi, everybody, and I hope you really enjoy the download that we have prepared for you as a bonus for this year's 2021 Homeschool Family Conference. We want to help you find books that give your children godly role models. They need to have heroes and people to look up to and examples to follow in how to behave in everyday life. And they're not going to find that in television, and they're not necessarily going to find it in good books, but they need it. And as mom and dad, and as siblings and grandparents and people in your local congregation, you can provide godly role models. But sometimes it's best for us to be able to go out into the world of imagination and try living something out, try applying biblical principles that we've been learning at home to the situations that are in a book, because it gives us practice. As we learn things from the Torah, and then from the rest of the Bible, the book of Proverbs, for example, and then we go into the pages of a book and we see a character doing things, we can go, I don't agree with that. That was not right. Or, ooh, I do agree with that. Maybe the character had no idea what Torah is. In fact, 99.9% of all the books in the world don't even know that Torah exists. And that's maybe a little bit of a dramatic percentage, but still, you're going to have a really difficult time finding books that are Torah observant. So I'm not going to ask you to go looking for those. One night I had a dream, and in my dream, I saw a notebook of pages put together, and a child was making it based on all the books that he had read. And when I woke up, I just could see it just as clear as a bell. So that's what this bonus is. It's what I saw in my dream that night. And I'm not saying that makes it inspired or anything like that. Just giving praise to the Almighty for giving me an idea. And I wish I could try this idea out in my family. This is a new idea. And so I think I'd like to ask if all of us together could take this next school year and try out this idea and report back to each other how it works. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. First of all, I'd like to show you this chart of all different kinds of reading genres. And then let's talk about ways that we can evaluate books and give our kids good books to read, or even books that we thought were good and then we get into them and find out they weren't perfect, but to redeem some qualities from them. So here are just 10 basic genres of reading for children. We have realistic fiction. So that's a story that happens in what the child would feel is a present day modern time. And it just feels like a realistic situation. And the child can interact with it. So this is just like real world stuff that it has to be real world from the child's perspective. So these are current books most of the time. And when I was a child, a book set in the 80s would feel like ancient history to a child today. So that's why I mentioned that. And then there's historical fiction. So everything else in the 1980s would be historical fiction for the child now. But of course, this goes back all the way through history to ancient history and into the medieval times. And then you've got your American history is full of it. And there's lots of good ways to find historical fiction. One of my favorites is All Through the Ages, History Through Literature. And in this book, she just goes grade by grade and shows you different books that go with various events. So for instance, if you're reading about the Industrial Revolution, I can't get that. Then you can look up books for all ages, grades 1 through 3, so on. And you can find books that are about that time period. So it's really great. And if you're looking for a list of good books, this is a really thick place to start. This is by Christine Miller. I have an older edition, so the cover might look a little different if you buy it now. Anyway, that's a great book for historical fiction. And the nice thing about history, what do they say about history? Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And so we want to make sure that we're reading about history and events that happened. And as our children, even though it might be from a fictional perspective, they can really get a good idea of how they would act in a similar situation. So it's pretty cool. So then we have fantasy. Fantasy is very popular right now. And it's easy for us, even in this picture here, it's showing, a wizard. It's talking about magic. In our home, we don't do magic and we don't do wizards. If we come across a book that we didn't realize there was magic in it, then we'll probably finish the book, but have a good discussion about it. For instance, the book Secret Garden had a section that talks about the magic of being in nature. And I don't think that was quite necessarily, you could maybe spin it, but they called it magic, and I don't really like that. But having said that, there are a lot of good values in that book, but that's not really fantasy. That one's more like a realistic book that's set in a certain time period as if it was historical. Fantasy would be maybe the animals are talking to each other down in at the creek bank, and they're all talking and having a conversation about something. And the turtle said to the wolf, this and that, and that's fantasy, because obviously that can't happen in real life. And I would allow my children to read something like that, because I think we know when something is make believe. I'm careful in our home that we don't border into magic. We also have science fiction, which is kind of a subgenre of fantasy, but it uses something scientific, and we're going to come back to that in a minute. But it's a kind of fantasy. But even in a world that does not exist, as they invent a new world, then they have to come up with all the science and technology to make that world exist. You can still learn moral lessons, and we'll come back to that. We have mystery. Mystery is awesome because it helps a child develop their thinking skills as they try to figure out who done it. And as they piece the clues together, and a well-written mystery has placed those clues not too obviously. So, they learn to pay attention. It's for a child that's struggling with maybe what we would call reading comprehension. A mystery book is great because it teaches them to pay attention to all the clues in a book, and it's just fun. Traditional literature would be the traditions of a culture, their legends and their myths. Obviously, most of those are not biblical. The legends of Hercules are not biblical, although some say they're based on events in Israeli history. Say Samson could be Hercules. You're going to have to decide. It doesn't hurt them to know about the myths of different nations, although it does say we're not to learn about the foreign gods and whether we should serve our God in their way. Definitely, the purpose of this is not so that we could serve their God or serve our God in their way, but to see if there might be some redeeming character quality that we could emulate. You'll have to use your judgment. If anything, you might learn about the myths so you can pick them apart and find out how they're not the same as Scripture. Then you have biographies. Biographies are cool because they're true to life, at least from the perspective of the person that wrote the biography. So as you learn about the life of a real person in history, you have to evaluate the choices that they made. For instance, David Livingstone, I don't necessarily agree that he should have left his wife and kids back in Europe and gone to Africa, but he did. And so we have to evaluate the choices that he made and determine for ourselves if the consequences were worth it. Were the benefits, did it make it right? According to the Bible, that's the key. Autobiographies are a subgenre, and they were just written by the person themselves, which is fun because you can get in their own words of why they did something, so you don't have to guess. The autobiography of George Mueller has got to be my favorite of all of them, but there are so many good ones. I really, really enjoy giving these missionary stories and stories of great inventors and scientists and people that lived in history. I really enjoy giving those to my children, but doesn't mean you won't come across a bad worldview, that you won't come across dabbling in things that we should not think about or talk about, or even Christmas and things like that. Definitely, they will be there. And so you have to wrestle with all of that. And then you have informational books. That's your science books and your history books and your atlas books and all the different books about how rockets work and, so on. And those are fun, but that's probably not where we're going to spend most of our time today. And also poetry, but I'm not going to spend much time on that today. So basically, what I was picturing in this dream was that you would make a book of book reports. And instead of book reports like what we made when we were in school, this would be more like our notebooking style that we talked about in other videos. And I can put a link below this one to some other videos where we've talked about what notebooking is. But there are a couple different kinds of pages. And so we've given you a download as a bonus for this conference. And here are some of the pages that you're going to get. One of them is a Fruits of the Spirit page. And on that page, you are going to determine what fruit of the Spirit the character that you want to choose from the book exhibited. and tell a little story about what you read in the book. And so that keeps the eyes of your reader always looking for characters who exhibit the fruits of the Spirit. And so that's a role model that they want to follow. I want to note that atheists and pagans can display the fruits of the Spirit, the qualities that Jehovah himself exhibits. Why is that? Well, it's because whether they know they're doing it or not, they're living according to the Torah at that moment in that area. Not saying in every area, but in that one they are. So, like for instance, I have a friend who is basically non-religious. She doesn't go to any church. She's a little bit towards New Age in her life, but not totally. She's a vegan and she likes things. She's a little crunchy, likes things all natural, but she definitely doesn't include God in her life. But she's incredibly generous. She would give you all of the food in her house if it was the last thing she could do. She's super generous. And so noting her generosity, I could figure out which fruit of the Spirit that is. I would probably love, is it kindness? Is it goodness? Anyway, she does this for others. If she were the character in a story I was reading, I would write down that she exhibited that quality and then tell about it. And then I would determine that I would want to do that also. Of course, the reasons I do it are so much higher and nobler because I have a personal relationship with the creator of the universe, and I want to walk in his instruction. But either way, even though she may not be aware that she is walking in his instruction, it's like the laws of physics. Anybody will fall off a cliff if they step off the edge. The laws of science, and gravity will pull them down if they step off. They don't have to believe in that law in order for it to affect them. And it's the same way as we read a book and anyone in that book is exhibiting the fruit of the Spirit and we take note of it, then we're concentrating on those good and lovely things that it talks about in Philippians. We can think to ourselves, what do I admire about that person? Come up with a verse maybe from the Torah or from Proverbs that tells us that that is a good thing. And so if you're not sure, some books that you might want to get, I'm going to show you my screen real quick and show you some websites that you can go to. So I'm going to take you to Amazon because I don't know where to get this book for on a different website, but this book is great. Proverbs for Parenting, a topical guide for child raising from the Book of Proverbs by Barbara Decker. And it's available on Kindle or paperback. I like mine on Kindle because it's searchable and I can search things. And it's really nice to find what does the Book of Proverbs alone say about an issue. So for instance, I'm going to go down here to the table of contents. And you can just see all kinds of instruction. And as a character, and I think it's nice to look for some positive character. And some of these are couched in kind of the negative, but it is okay. You can still find honesty, goodness, happiness. You have a happy character, mercy, righteousness. And if a character is doing something like teasing, you could look that up if you wanted to, if that was what you wanted to focus on for your book report. I'd also like to show you doorpost.com. And this company is pretty awesome. They have a book called For Instruction in Righteousness, a topical reference guide for biblical child training. And you can get this as a paperback or as a PDF, even upload it to your Kindle, again, which is what I did. And it's pretty nice. And it's just got tons and tons of instruction, and you can view some sample chapters there. So as you're looking for verses to write down on your page about that character, you can use some of these books or just Google it. Say, what does the Bible say about, and then see what comes up. Are there any things that I should avoid in that character's life? So say you have someone who is very honest, but one time when they were 15, they did something in the book that is not according to Torah, even though you'd like to highlight their honesty. So that's when you should include on the page, yes, this person is a godly role model, but I do want to avoid this one area of their life. I'm not judging them too critically or feeling like I would never do a sin, but I just want to point out that they shouldn't have done that one thing. And then as you've written all these verses down and you've got them on looked up for the various character qualities and what the Torah and the scriptures say about it, you can then have those verses be copywork, dictation, or something for your reading, writing, and arithmetic that we talked about last night. You can use the Fruits of the Spirit page for several different kinds of books. You can use it for realistic fiction. You can use it for fantasy, for science fiction, for mysteries, and even for traditional literature like your myths and your legends. So you can pretty much use it for any type of reading, but I think it's be cool to focus on those and have something good to draw out of those books that we sometimes avoid. I'm not saying read everything, but if you found one that you think is going to be a good book, except for maybe a couple references, this is a really great option. So that's one style of notebooking page that we want to give you as a gift. Another kind is a historical fiction page. And on this page, there's a timeline across the top, and you will mark on it the time period in which this historical fiction book happened. And if the person lived at a certain time period, you're going to write the date. So I have my example, Little House in the Big Woods. You're going to research, when did this happen in real history? And while this I'm calling historical fiction, because I think that not every account in this book is true. You could possibly put it as a biography. So biography is a great thing for this as well. So you've got the timeline at the top. Now, ideally, over time, as you read lots and lots of books from lots of historical periods, if you put them in order in your notebook according to the timeline, you can see if there are places of history that you've never read about, and you could put a page there. Or you could say, man, I really love American history. I especially love the Revolutionary War. Look I've read 10 books on that in the last year. But anyway, putting them in order, it'd be cool over the course of a year, or even over the course of a child's entire education, to see all the books that they read. Can you imagine how fun that would be? So file them in the binder that you made in the order of the date, and put an index in the back. We've provided one for you so that you can also write down the names of the people that you were reading about, especially the key characters that you wanted to remember that they lived at that time period, someone who was memorable in the book, and put that name in the back as, or even more so, because those might be fiction, and you might maybe put a star or something if it's not an actual person. But if they come into contact, let's say you're reading a historical fiction book in the American Revolution, and your character comes into contact with George Washington, you might note that George Washington was in that book, and then put his name in the index so that you could find that book later. And that would be a valuable resource for someday. When you don't remember what's in all the books, at least that's how I have trouble. Now, I wanted to say, if you're going to read historical fiction, it's urgent that you also pick up a copy of Revelation of Jesus Christ Revealed by Christine Miller. And yes, she uses the word Jesus Christ, but I promise you this is a very Torah observant book, and you're going to love it. You don't have to agree with the view on Revelation, but what I want you to note is that she's got this arranged by order of history. She believes in a historical perspective of the book of Revelation. It starts in 96 AD and goes all the way into Yeshua's future kingdom. So if I were reading a story of Little House in the Big Woods, part of the assignment on this page is I'm going to go into Revelation Revealed, which I know because I've read the book. And so mom and dad, you got to read the book so you'll know how to use it. But I'm going to go into Revelation chapter 12, and I'm going to read about the woman in the wilderness. And I'm going to note that on my page so that I can understand what's going on in the world when Laura Ingalls Wilder was living in the big woods. Okay, what worldviews are there? What kinds of things is Jehovah judging the world for at that time period? What kind of things are idolatrous to them? Are they living under the beast system? Are they living under Roman emperors? Are they, like I said, in the wilderness? And so as you read this book and connect the two of them together, and you keep doing that with book after book after book, you're going to get a really cool grounding in why people do what they do. And I know it's historical fiction, but they're usually based very strongly on what's really going on. So if you're reading about the Russian Revolution and you plug it into what's going on in the book of Revelation and what's going on in prophecy and what the Bible says about that time period, you'll have an understanding from his perspective of why the people are acting the way they are. And I know this is going to take a little bit of work because you'll have to actually understand this book. I'm saying as parents, you might do this part for your child until they're old enough to understand the book and history enough to do it for themselves. So that's kind of your homework. To help with that homework, what we're going to do is we would like to invite you to join our Revelation Revealed group in our community forum. And that way, if you're not sure, if you're reading a book and you're like, I don't know where this goes, then maybe someone else could help you and you could have a discussion about it too, which would be awesome. So some of the kinds of books that you could put on a page like this would be historical fiction, of course, biographies and autobiographies. Those would be the most ideal for plugging in. Now, the only kinds we haven't talked about are science fiction and informational. And you could put science fiction in Fruits of the Spirit, or you obviously can't put it into a real historical time period. So it is possible you could have a third page, and these are going to be a worldview page where you discuss what worldview is behind why the author wrote that book. And I'm going to recommend a couple books for you as parents that you want to read about, so you have an idea of worldview. And again, this is something you're going to do, and you're going to help your child then learn it because you are going to become the expert on it. Okay. So a fantastic book would be The Long War Against God by Dr. Henry Morris. This one is really great if you're going to be reading science fiction, because it explains the worldviews on evolution that have been around since the time of the Tower of Babel. And believe it or not, they show up in science fiction books, because usually when people create a world, they create it based on a real thing that happened here in the earth. As Solomon says, there's nothing new under the sun. So that book will really give you a good idea of why people created the world like that, and you can evaluate it. Other books that are important, just think about humanism. After all, the Bible says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. So that makes humanity the God. And you'll see that come out in science fiction. Or what you could evaluate what logical fallacies were in this book. So you could use science fiction or even science books, like informational books, like Usborne books and DK books and things like that, to discuss what are the logical fallacies. They say that millions and millions of years ago this happened. Why is that not logical? So this would give you a lot of opportunity to have good discussions. Some of these things might not make a great book report. Some of these things might be more fun to just talk about and not make a book report. Let's see. Some other good books that I just don't have right here in front of me, but Assumptions, and I've got them listed in your download. Assumptions that affect our lives. How should we then live? Let me see. I'm going to have a whole list of books that I think you should really consider getting. Some other ones you can understand the place of Israel in history, and that would be Who is Israel? A Redeemed Israel, a primer, and Restoring Israel's Kingdom. Both of these are by Batya Wooten or her husband Angus Wooten, and they're really great. These help you understand setting up a kingdom and setting up a world, and how Yehovah created a world, and now he dispersed his people because of disobedience, and he's going to bring them back. And so in a lot of science fiction, you have like a Messiah type, someone who's going to save the world. And that's really handy to actually understand the real deal and how he's going to save the world. So those are just some great books. Again, all of those are linked in your download so that you can see them. So anyway, I would recommend that, for depending on the child's age, that they fill out the front and keep it really simple. And then you have a discussion based on what they've written down and all that homework I gave you. Okay, so all this homework, you've done it. And now you can have an intelligent discussion, and they're a little weak in that area, and I'm worried that they could fall prey to that destructive heresy. So let's talk about it for just a short conversation. Maybe we are going to be on the way to the store, and we'll have a 20-minute conversation about humanism. And it just opens the door. On the back of the page that your child makes, I would recommend that you as a parent make some notes about the book. If you had a discussion, write it down and the date you had it. A little brief summary of what you discussed. Take notes about problems that you found in the book or that your child noticed. Mom, they celebrated Christmas, or Mom, they blew up a pig's bladder and they ate the entire pig, everything but the oink. And you can have a discussion about that. Even young children, you can do this with. I have this book. It's really nice. The New Bible and Pictures for Little Eyes, but it's not written from a Torah perspective. So, as Solomon's looking at building get that so you can see it. Solomon builds a house for God. You can evaluate the sentences on that page and see if that's how you would word it. You don't have to be too critical all the time. You don't have to take all the fun out of enjoying books. But if there's something that's just blaring at you and you can't handle how badly worded it is, then you could make a note of it. And again, I think that having a binder with the notes about all the books that you read would be fantastic. We are going to also invite you to join our book club. And this is different from the Revelation Revealed Club. This is just where people can discuss books. And I want to encourage you that as you fill out the downloads that we've given you, and as you do them with your kids, and I'm going to try to do this too this year, that we all snap a picture of it with our phone and we upload it to the book club. And then we can see that other people are reading books, and we're not going to be critical of each other. Oh, my word, they read that book. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to go, okay, they read that book. I wouldn't, but let's see what they learned in it. And maybe there's something that they were able to teach their children with. You're going to go out to the grocery store and you're going to see people that are not doing things according to Torah, and you need to have the ability to have discussions about it. And books are safer than the real world. And you can't, as Yeshua says, we are not to leave this world. We're a part of this world, but we're to be in the world, but not of it, right? So anyway, in the book club, I encourage you to upload all of the discussions and show the notebooking pages that your kids have made over this year. Let's try to do it for a whole year. And by the end of the year, we can really see our kids growing in their ability to discern. And on top of that, as next year comes, parents can come in to the book club and they can go, oh, I want to try that book. And ooh, I never heard of that book before. And a need that we have of finding good books, we can all work together to get them. So I think that would be just a fantastic thing to do. You don't have to agree with every word of a book. You can do your own research and come up with what truth is, but you can still glean a ton of good things. So you need to know scripture. Parents, you need to do your homework yourself. You're responsible, and discuss. That's the most important thing. Talk to your kids. Have lots of discussions. Remember, a child left to himself brings his mother to shame. So I'm not saying turn your kids loose on things and never supervise or discuss, but you can discuss and get a lot of benefit. So I hope this download thing is very helpful for you. Again, please show us what you've done with it. Shalom.